everybody. Welcome to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. I am Tom Holt. I'm a professor here in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, and I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training. And I'm here with my excellent colleagues, as always, my co-hosts. I'll let them introduce themselves.
I'm Rachel McNealey. I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Criminal Justice and an associate with the center.
Hi, I'm Taylor Fisher. I'm a postdoc here at MSU, and I too am an associate with the center.
So if you've never joined us before, our podcast is all about talking about cybercrime issues, cybersecurity issues, trying to bridge the gaps that exist, whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're an academic, whether you're a practitioner, even if you're just an average person and you want to know more. Our hope is that we can inform, we can get you a little more experience and knowledge, and we can try to demystify some problems, some things that maybe you're not aware of. And today's guest is going to really help us with that. He is a fantastic scholar. He's a noteworthy cybercrime researcher. He's somebody whose work I have followed for quite a while, and I've been lucky enough to get to work with him on different projects. He's an excellent guy. It's Dr. Kevin Steinmetz. He's a professor of sociology at Kansas State University. And today we're going to be focusing on a very specific problem, which we haven't really touched on yet, and that is the issue of social engineering, which, what comes to mind when you both think about social engineering?
I think when I think about social engineering, it's kind of this technique that's emerged to really tap into fear, right? And fear of crime is something we talk about a lot. But I think urgency paired with kind of feeling like you don't know how these scary cyber crimes work makes social engineering extremely potent. And you think about, or I think about, people getting calls claiming to be from their relatives who have been in a car crash and need money. They're really playing on these harrowing fears. And I think it's an area where emotion, risk, and fear really come into play.
Absolutely, yeah, the emotions definitely come to mind, but I also think of just the variety of different attacks that have some component of social engineering. I know we constantly are getting smishing attacks. I know, considering my car was broken down on the turnpike, I got a "you owe toll fees," and it really concerned me for a second because I definitely left with a tow truck, so I did not pay them. But you know, it's all about that timing and making that opportunity of, if somebody's just so happened to know that I was in Ohio, send me an Ohio Turnpike text message. And so I really think of the variety and the creativity that comes behind social engineering. We don't really get at the creativity of offenders a lot, but it's certainly something that I've seen in my own experience and then also in the research.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of social engineering, I think of anybody trying to pull one over on you, whether it's in person, whether it's via text or email or social media or whatever. And it's amazing how easy it is to do yourself when you're not necessarily thinking about it. And I know that's going to sound weird, but like, I've been to a lot of conferences and hotels. If you wear a suit and you just walk somewhere like you know you belong there, people may or may not question you on it, and you can get into places, you can do things, and that's the interesting thing to me when I think about social engineering. It doesn't require, certainly it can require technical skill and proficiency, but you can do it in person, you can do it online, and just so long as you're convincing, you can get people to believe a lot of stuff, which is part of the problem. What's the best movie version of social engineering you've ever seen?
So I got one for this. It's an old Robert Redford movie called Sneakers. And there is this scene where Robert Redford's trying to get into a hotel, and he's there's somebody talking with the hotel manager or the person at the desk, and they're having kind of like a heated exchange, and Robert Redford wants to get into the hotel, so he goes forward with like a birthday cake and some balloons, and he's starting to yell at the guy like, "Hey, I need you to open the door. It's somebody's birthday." And the guy just kind of gets flustered and just lets him right into the back door. But it's that thing that you were talking about, Tom. He was acted like he belonged there, said it with confidence, had a good pretense of like, "Hey, I'm here delivering birthday cake and balloons," and was let right in. It was like perfect social engineering example.
And I feel like it's a skill that's talked about a lot. If you think of kind of advice for entrepreneurs, right? Putting on this air of you belong there, you know what you're doing. It's kind of a soft social skill that I think is, you know, pro-social and normalized, but then when it's leveraged, which it has been forever, con men, right? Like we know scams and cons have existed for a long time, so.
Yeah, what comes to mind is a series of TikToks of all things, right? And I think it kind of speaks to the fact that social engineering isn't inherently illegal or immoral, right? It can be used for like sales and things like that. But what comes to mind is there was a group of YouTubers, whoever, that were trying to get in as many places that they could just carrying a ladder. So they just wore like plain clothes and they carried a ladder between the two of them. They got into like 30 different businesses. And I was just shocked, like, sure, it's a prank, like, whatever, but it really is social engineering. And to think that there's very legitimate ways to use it and very illegitimate ways to use it is very interesting.
It reminds me of some of the interviews I was doing, and I'm probably getting ahead of things a little bit. I don't know if we're going to talk about, like, the research studies that I've done or whatever. But when I was interviewing some people who do, like, social engineering as part of, like, IT security audits, a number of them said things like, you know what I love to do? I like to dress as the pest control guy, like going around with a fake bug sprayer, acting like I'm spraying stuff down because nobody talks to the pest control guy. Or other people were like, I go into a place dressed as the janitor because nobody talks to the janitor. I mean, I'm different, I do. But apparently, according to them, most people don't talk to the janitor. So you can just walk right in if you're wearing gray coveralls.
So, Kevin, what got you into studying cybercrime in the first place?
So it's kind of a boring answer. Probably like most people who get into it, kind of a nerd. Like, I like computers. I took coding classes in high school and a little bit in college. It's something that I was, I'm not like super proficient compared to some people out there who are just wizards, but like I'm reasonably competent. And when it came time, when I was working on my master's degree to decide, what am I going to do for my thesis? I was like, well, there's not a whole lot of people, because this was like circa 2007, 2008. Not a whole lot of people other than you, Tom, doing a whole lot of stuff in this space. So I was like, well, I'll do something on digital piracy. And here's the thing. Once you start doing research in an area, it's kind of hard to stop because you kind of get roped into it. So that's just kind of became the rabbit hole I fell down over the rest of my career. Is like, okay, first digital piracy. I'll do hacker culture for my dissertation. Okay, I did that. What's next? Social engineering? Okay, I'll move on to that.
Why did you want to study social engineering? I know it flows out of hacking, but anything in particular draw you to that topic?
It was a broader interest of mine has been the human element of cybercrime. And it's largely because while I've been reading the literature, as a graduate student, I was going through the literature, and present company excluded, I found that a lot of the literature tended to kind of sensationalize things or tended to be very impersonal. The humanity had kind of been drained out of it. It was all statistical formula, or it was like, hey, we're going to like do, a few surveys of some people on a forum, but like there wasn't like people talking to people. But social engineering is like this really interesting cross section where it's like, the term social engineering itself, and I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. The term social engineering itself is a cultural product. It came out of the phone phreakers of the 1970s. And it was used in a very particular cultural context. It was, a bunch of people who were interested in tech stuff who were trying to figure out a word that sounded cool to them that wasn't them just saying, I'm deceiving someone or manipulating something. Because every subculture wants to have its own, lingo and sound cool. And that term just kind of picked up traction. So even the term itself has this human element. And it's this cross-section of this fundamental practice that humans do of persuading each other, deceiving one another, manipulating one another, and then its deployment within the context of information security. And so it kind of just wedded these two interests of mine of like the digital context plus a fundamental human enterprise, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. That seems to be a theme of all of our talk so far, is the human element gets forgotten so often. And as social scientists, we are very aware of it, but trying to convince people that we have a spot at the table has been a really difficult process.
And I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you come up with an answer for how to make room at that table more effectively, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'll work on it.
Yeah. But the separation of, we used the word meat space the other day, cyberspace versus meat space. I think has kind of led right to this bifurcation of we have offline behavior, we have online behavior. And social engineering, I would imagine, is a good example of something that crosses those, right? You have in-person social engineering when you're doing things like physical pen testing, but then kind of social engineering that's perpetrated by someone who inhabits meat space, if you will, and is facilitating it online. So can you speak to how social engineering kind of bridges those two domains if they ever were separate?
Yeah, so I don't think they're separate, except in the sense of whatever medium you're using to communicate. And if we're like being like good like Marshall McLuhan type thinkers, to some extent the medium is the message. Like communicating over, email is going to have a slightly different, it's going to have different parameters around it. It's going to have different meaning that you're going to imbue into the message. People are going to interpret it differently. And so you have to work with what the medium gives you. Same thing for like delivering a deception over a phone. It kind of constrains the message. It's going to create certain expectations of the people involved that you have to work with if you're going to deceive somebody as a social engineer. Same thing for physical. But outside of like how the medium impacts it, it's all the same type of core fundamental things. Like, when I'm trying to teach students about social engineering, I don't give them contemporary stuff. I go read Irving Goffman, go read The Symbolic Interactionist, go read his stuff on encounters, or, the presentation of self in everyday life, because the fundamental principles of interaction that he describes in the 1950s and 60s are the same ones we're talking about now. The online context is just a patina on top of this fundamental human deception that's going on.
Mm-hmm. And I love the shout out to Goffman as someone who did their PhD in a combined crim soc department.
Nice.
Love that.
So talk for just a minute, because I know some of our audience is not necessarily academic. When you talk about symbolic interactionism, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so symbolic interactionism, that's a good question, is this kind of school of decidedly American sociology that was more like what some people might call like a micro-sociology, which means it's down at the individual level. So like you have people like the French sociologist Durkheim, who was looking at how enemy manifests in a society and how that can drive suicide rates. Symbolic interactionists aren't looking at like those big picture structural cultural questions. They're going, what are the rules of engagement right here, right now? Like, how are we talking to one another? What are the expressions that you wear? How is it that you're trying to figure out what I'm saying? Like, if it's a deception's going on, Goffman describes something called like, a deception, then a covering move, like you're trying to evade detection, and then a counter move, and then a counter move, and all this type of stuff. He's focusing on like the little rules that dictate every little social interaction that we tend to kind of like not think about. They tend to fade into the background and we take them for granted. Symbolic interactionism asks us to kind of problematize those very fundamental things and try to lay them bare. So you have like Goffman with the rules of social interaction. You have people like Cooley with the looking glass self and how we form identity by looking at how other people interact with us. Like, I will think of myself as others treat me type of mentality. So that's basically symbolic interactionism in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. So one word that kind of comes to mind as you were talking about that is authority, and how social engineering can really hone in on this fake authority or a perceived authority, right? I'm pretending to be somebody that has authority over you. And that really does speak to kind of our social structures and how we respect people of authority, what we think of people in authority. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are, in terms of leveraging authority in social engineering. How often is that a component? Is it that impactful of a strategy?
In terms of how often, I can't give you like exact numbers, but it is definitely leveraged, especially when you're looking at like targeted organizational attacks or like spear phishing type of attacks. You'll see someone try to pretense, spear phishing being, if we're going to break down the basic terms, like is a phishing email that's really tailored to the individual target. Like if I were to try to go after Tom, I might try to pretend that I was his dean, right? And that might convince Tom to do certain things that any other person might not be able to get him to do. There was actually, so I was, as Tom knows, I was the chair of the division of cybercrime, which he helped start. So the treasurer secretary of the division got an email that was purportedly from me, And it's because I was the chair, they were the secretary treasurer, and it was me telling them, oh, well, you need to release funds or wire transfer funds from the division, which to me was hilarious. One, because Cassie and I know each other. Like, she was just able to reach out to me, but like, you're going to find this funny. And two, wildly misunderstands the amount of money that academic divisions have.
My first thought was, what funds?
Yeah. So like authority works, but authority is kind of like always that thing that lever that people can pull. So like one of the most insidious social engineering frauds I remember that was really big, what is it, like 4 or 5 years ago, was when people were calling and pretending to be like law enforcement personnel threatening to arrest people for tax evasion. And I guess those are still happening, but they kicked off like 4 or 5 years ago. Like, threat of law enforcement is a pretty big pull on authority. Like, you think you're in trouble, they have the authority to, arrest you, to throw you in jail, state-sanctioned monopoly on violence and all that.
So thinking about social engineering as a tool, to what end does it typically use? Is it mostly for financial gain through these various types of, phishing campaigns and such? Are people just trying to wreak havoc?
I mean, yeah, certainly there are people who are, trying to wreak havoc. You got like, and their heyday is kind of done, but back in the 2010s, you had people like Anonymous who were using social engineering strategies for the lulls and for political protest and just general disarray. And that still happens, but if we're being honest, the types of threats that we're most concerned of that are hitting businesses and organizations every day, it's pretty instrumental. It's pretty financially driven. It's either get the credentials, get access to a system, or it's convince someone to like let go of funds somehow. It's pretty, I mean, if we're going to apply rational choice theory or anything like that to a crime, most of it would probably fall under that this is going to get me a thing I want category.
So you noted organizations. I think that's an important note, right? We're talking about individuals and how they're impacted by this and how there can be individual consequences, but there can also be organizational consequences. If I'm an employee of MSU and I click on a phishing link, now the MSU network is at risk. And so, the role that companies and organizations play in bettering their employees to identify social engineering, acknowledge it, right, is so incredibly difficult and requires resources. And so that's, something that's ongoing. And I always question, whose responsibility is it? Me as an individual to protect any of my interactions, or my organizations to say, you're a piece of our organization, therefore have to abide by these standard practices?
And I would say, and I would love to hear your all's thoughts on this as well, but it's a really good question. It's a difficult one to answer. So, like, I have a problem when people say that security is everyone's responsibility. Because on the one hand, yeah, like, kind of course, a good society is one where everyone's looking out for each other, and same thing for an organization. You want everyone to be vigilant to some extent. But in practice, that's not really all that effective of a mindset, because, like, my job is not security. Like, my job is to do research, to educate students, right? And the more you beat me over the head with me having to focus on security, the less I'm going to want to focus on those other tasks. But also, sometimes security gets in the way of me doing my job, right? That's true of almost anyone who works for an organization, is that there can be a mismatch between the demands made by security and demands made by your job. And so, really what this is, for me, it's a question of like leadership and culture and organizational structure. Like, security needs to be built around people. We need to remember that these are people involved. There's like this wonderful like engineering mindset that sometimes tends to get applied among like cybersecurity and IT folks, which is, well, we built a system, it's perfectly rational, we have these rules that people have to follow, we have a policy laid out, people need to follow it. Why aren't people following this? I explicitly said in the rules. It's like, what is it, that Brooklyn Nine-Nine quote where Captain Holt's like, I explicitly said everyone should have fun. Yeah. And but that's not how people work. Like, if you're going to make a really secure organization, you need to understand how people do their jobs. You need to understand the types of practices that they're engaged in as they're relating to one another, as they're relating to the client base, as they're relating to administration. And then you need to build the security around that. The security needs to fit the organization and the culture, not the other way around. I mean, there's always room to compromise in this if, because sometimes the security is really that important. Like if you're in a military installation, okay, probably bend the organization around security and hold people really accountable. But most of the time, that's not really going to be a practical way to run an organization. And hopefully this is making some kind of sense.
Yeah, you mentioned that you talked to security professionals about the job and about social engineering in particular. Was it hard to get people on board to talk about this as an issue, or were people really excited to tell you their opinions on this?
I mean, in my experience, most people were pretty excited to talk about it. I think, and this is just like for like qualitative research in general, people like being asked to talk about something that they're good at or interested in. Yeah, sometimes they might be like, well, I don't want to give away like corporate secrets or like that's really a trade secret or whatever. But when you're asking them, hey, I don't know a whole lot about this. What do you think makes for a good security awareness program? They'll tell you everything. They'll just lay it out like, well, in my opinion, this is what works. I mean, people like being appealed to. So I didn't have any difficulty really getting folks to talk to us.
So what did they say was the best thing that you could do? What was their opinion on it?
So opinions varied. One of the things, and this is actually a paper that we worked on together, Tom, that was pretty consistent was the amount of punitiveness that was employed with a policy. And this was both a moral point for some people as well as a policy effectiveness point. So there are some organizations that if you like fall for a phishing email, you get fired. Like if you fail a security audit, you're fired. Or like you're shamed in front of your employees, like you're scolded and all this stuff. And a number of the people that I talked to doing this research that me and my colleague Richard Go and Alexandra Pimentel talked to were like, that's not good on two fronts. One, we have to remember that everyone's human and everyone is vulnerable to social engineering. Everyone. Because it just takes one bad day, right? Or one slip up and suddenly you've been compromised. So it's not fair to necessarily be that punitive when it's just a human vulnerability. But on the pragmatic end, you want people who are going to be willing to admit they messed up. You're going to want people willing to report that they did something. And you're going to want people who feel a buy-in that the organization has their back. And that is all going to go away if you're threatening them. Because if I mess up, now I have every incentive in the world to go, well, I hope nobody catches that. I'm not reporting it because I don't want to lose my job, right?
Quick anecdote on that note. While I was finishing my dissertation, which was a simulated smishing attack, I fell for a phishing attack from our university. And I remember Dr. Burris coming to me and saying, Taylor, what are you doing? Like, how could this have been you? And when we met with IT, they were going through all the people that had clicked, and I was like, oh, let's hope my name doesn't show up, right? And so it really is. It's all about timing and opportunity and playing on those emotions of, I need this right now. I was looking for an attachment, and I thought it was the right attachment, and I clicked it. Yeah. And so I mean, that was just me in the moment, not thinking.
I mean, someone else got me. Like, it was like a year ago. I was browsing my Google feed, looking at news, and occasionally advertisements would pop up. And at the time, I was kind of looking at new guitar amplifiers. And this 65 Deluxe Reverb Fender amp popped up on an ad. And I was like, holy hell, that price is insane. And it looked like it was from a guitar store that was from my hometown in Kentucky. And I was like, I clicked on it, and the website looked legit. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But then I stopped for a moment and went, wait a minute, this might be too good. So I backed out and I did a Google search, pulled up the actual store and looked at the inventory there and found out, yeah, there was like a wild discrepancy in the prices. This was a spoofed web page that was somehow being advertised on Google Feed as if it were legit. Yeah, so it almost got me. So that's what I'm saying, like, nobody's immune to this.
Yeah, I think that vector, too, is something that people are not aware of, is spoofed web pages. And I think the more we talk about phishing, people know to look out for scammy emails, more so text now. And I do not think that people are aware nearly enough of making sure you're where you think you are on the internet. And it's just all these different ways that, yeah, you can prey on familiarity and assumption to get people to hand over information, essentially.
Yep, my parents got it with a hotel scam last year where
Oh,
we
no.
booked for a place we were supposed to stay, got there, you don't have a reservation with us.
Oh no.
Oh,
Okay,
no.
great. They went through what looked like Experian or, whatever hotel website it was and thought they were booking correctly, and nope. So
That's
it doesn't really
brutal.
matter. It's very, yeah, that SEO poisoning kind of thing is
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Well,
Gets
and
you
it's
every
we
time.
just take it for granted, right?
Mhm.
It's what popped up. Of course, that's what it is, and it's just the not taking the time to look at the URL, and that's something that we aren't taught early.
Yeah, you trust the website
Yeah.
results because it's Google. Why would it be wrong?
Yeah, Google wouldn't lie to me.
Never. And so I'm thinking a lot about organizations, right? And this is something I've talked about a bit with you guys before, but thinking about individuals as vectors, if you will, towards organizations. And so as individuals, right, when we interact with our personal machines, I think loosely you could equate it to locking the front door of your own house, right? If you don't do that, with traditional crime, you and your own belongings are at risk. If we think of clicking on a link or not being secure with your email as an unlocked door, if that's an email linked to an organization, you have now opened it up to an entire network of information and people to be victimized. So how do we, tailor security practices and awareness to the severity of that threat?
So yeah, and the idea that like it takes one person, loose lips sink ships. It takes one person, and suddenly the whole organization is compromised. And fortunately, I think most folks working in cybersecurity have adopted practices of, at least if they have the resources to do this, of segmenting the network. And that's really kind of an important thing and this is when we were interviewing folks, a few people were telling us about this as well, that you only have access to the things that you need to have access to do your job. So that if you get compromised, it's not a ripple effect and suddenly taking out everyone. But that's fortunately a fairly standard practice. It's not foolproof, especially when people start doing what's called whaling, and they start going after like C-suite folks or like people who have super user access to a network. But you would hope that they're a little more resilient, although I heard multiple people tell me that sometimes C-suite folks are the easiest people to phish and social engineer.
They probably take for granted that there's enough protections, right?
Well, and also in
So-
their defense, they're busy. They're dealing with 1 million emails a day, constant meetings, and that interrupts your ability to kind of fully process the authenticity of a request.
So what do we do with the small proportion of people who just simply aren't going to learn, whether it's because of obstinance or for some reason it just simply isn't cutting through? How do we deal with the 4 or 5% of people who are always going to click on that phishing email no matter how much education they get?
Yeah. Well, I guess who's we in this? Are you talking like an organization or like we as a society?
Good question. I guess maybe
Royal we. Yes. Capital W.
yeah, let's take the organizational perspective, I guess. What's the best move?
So, and this is based off the interviews as well. If you have those folks who just repeatedly fall for scams, and unfortunately to some extent, the idea is that being victimized can make you more resilient, that you're going to become a big champion of like, hey, this got me, we really need to take this seriously. But also sometimes the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And with those folks who just keep falling for the same scams, you can try training, you can try reprimanding, you can try changing their access privileges, you can try changing their position in their role to better accommodate their proclivities to let people have access. But unfortunately, there's probably a time where the organization is going to be better off without them. But that also depends on the type of organization you're working for and the sensitivity of the data that you have access to.
Looking to break into or advance your career in cybercrime and cybersecurity? Push your career forward with a master's degree in cybercrime and digital investigation from Michigan State University. Experience a nationally ranked program taught by world-renowned researchers and practitioners that can help you play a role in combating cybercrime and advancing justice for victims. Designed to be completed in as little as 2 years and in a flexible online format that can work around your schedule. Visit cj.msu.edu to learn more.
So that's an interesting point, because a lot of what I think about in this area is how do we prepare students to be good professionals, right? Good cybersecurity professionals. And to your point of, if you don't have the resources to segment a network, that's assuming you have somebody managing your network that knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
If I were to start a business, I might be able to set up the initial network, but if it grows, now I suddenly need to hire people in. So how can we be better about, the term producing is maybe not the best, but producing this next force of professionals and getting them to the point where we don't have to worry about phishing stuff. We can get them to think of it kind of innately within the job they're already doing.
That's a really good question, and unfortunately, I don't think I have a satisfactory answer for you.
I understand it's a big question.
We like asking the big questions around here.
Yeah,
I just think so much of, there has to be a baseline of security, and I think generations above us are probably not as well suited. Younger generations might be better suited, right, because they've come up with technology, but there's got to be some way that we can get at this kind of workforce issue of, we have a lot of need in this area of building out good secure networks, but we don't really have the base of people going into networking courses. So I just feel like there's this big need, but we're not answering it with the resources that are necessary.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll approach this from a slightly different angle, and so feel free to tell me if I'm taking us down the garden path. But I would almost challenge that a little bit, in the sense that I'm not sure we can arrive at these types of expectations of a baseline of a competent workforce until we have consistent policy frameworks in place. Because the US is one of the only Western countries that doesn't have a general data protection regulation. And until we have those types of baselines established of hey, here's what organizations are allowed to carry. We have HIPAA and stuff like that, but that's a very piecemeal regulatory framework. So until we have more consistency there and say, hey, this is the data you're allowed to carry, this is how long you're allowed to retain it, these are the practices that you're supposed to use. Until we get more consistency in there, we can't really expect the workforce to follow suit in that regard. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's one of the things that always surprises me when you mention the notion of the different regulations that are out there. We worked at an educational institution, so we have FERPA to deal with. Depending on where you are, there's HIPAA. Depending on what part you're in, there's also FinCEN rules. So there are so many different patchwork guidelines that are in place that I can't imagine trying to create a policy for an environment where you have multiple different competing ideas operating at once.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good answer in this regard. At least I don't have one. But I'm trying to think more in policy these days, and I don't see how we can have expectations about the nature of the workforce until we have clear, consistent guidance from above, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think you made a point earlier about the moral expectations of how to act in these scenarios, and I think people are very quick to make moral judgments about people who don't spot things like these, which is just a trend about victimization that has long existed. But it kind of brings up the idea of something we talk about with different forms of victimization, like sexual victimization, of stigma and shame. So how do we kind of approach stigma around falling for social engineering, really?
Yeah, as a society, I don't really know how we can deal with that unless we just keep pushing the message of look, anyone can fall for this, and it's not a character flaw, it's you're human, right? Human interaction could not possibly happen. Society cannot function unless we have some ability to trust the people around us. And those are the cracks that social engineers and fraudsters exploit. But I don't want to live in a society where I can't trust anybody, or that I can't have a conversation with a person on the street. So, to some extent, this is going to be a natural fact of just living in a society, is that this is going to happen. It goes hand in hand. And now I forgot. What were we talking about? I lost my train of thought.
I kind of lost my way through my own question, to be honest. But I just think it's shit when people get judged, essentially, for falling for
the victim blaming aspect. Yeah.
Yes.
So what I can say is at the organizational level is, and this is really a leadership and culture issue, is that it's really up to people like the IT security administrators, the C-suite folks, whoever it is in an organization, to make it clear that you're human. If something happens, Please report it. You will not be punished. We will handle it. You are a prized member of the team. We understand that this is embarrassing, but understand that we understand. And then move forward with that and make that like a daily practice, like make it clear. Like, but this is like having leadership, like in the room, taking like security trainings with you. This is leadership, like admitting when they mess up. It's those types of things. And I think that will go a long way to kind of like destigmatizing it, at least in the workplace. And you might be like, oh, Charlie over here fell for it. And you might get ribbed a little bit, but it's not going to be the same as like, oh my God, what did I do?
Like, I'm getting fired for this.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting that you say, not to treat it as discipline, because speaking to my mom, she fell for a phishing attack at her work, had to do like an education-based training. And she said it was like I was being punished. I said, no, they're trying to better educate you. They're trying to make you better. And she said, yeah, but it took time out of my day. It's not something that I would do normally. And she seemed to think it was a punishment. So that conversation of, no, this is really trying to help you. I'm really, truly want it to be better for everybody, but getting people to believe that.
And I'm actually sympathetic with your mom here, because, I mean, like, I would view it as a punishment, right? I mean, it's hard not to feel that. And so, I mean, I think her perspective is perfectly valid in this regard. Like, she messed up, but then now she's like, you better take an extra 2 hours of training out of your day, and it's going to delay all of your other work. Yeah, it would feel like a punishment.
It's almost, to me, it seems like it's on organizations, as you said, to form policy that isn't designed for this idealized idea of perfect human behavior, right? That then if you don't meet that and thus the policy has failed, that's on you. You messed up.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem in connecting risk with actual behavior, especially for average people who aren't educated in this area.
So thinking about risk, one of the things that I really struggle with is how we combine, or how we coexist, maybe is a better way to put it, with the fact that we have to be such an open society in terms of online behavior. We're expected, even as university employees, to have a LinkedIn profile, to be active in different environments. But those environments create massive opportunities for a good social engineer to know, oh, okay, this person is the admin for this unit. This person is the finance officer for this unit. So how do we manage that issue of the desire for people to know what we're doing and know our roles and know all of this, with the idea that we're just giving all the information to engineers to enable behavior?
And I'm not sure I have a really good answer for that. And I would love to hear your all's thoughts on this, because we wrote a piece about organizational vulnerability using these interviews. And one of the characteristics that we described being associated with vulnerable organizations was what we called the notion of openness, which some organizations, are very locked down. Like a military installation, like you don't know who works there. You don't have access to all of their email addresses. They're not providing like a roster of all the personnel that work there. And the physical facilities are difficult to get in and out of. If you call the facility, there might be like best case scenario, one number, and it's going to be heavily vetted, heavily controlled. That's good, obviously more secure. But there are some organizations that does not work for it. That does not work for higher ed, right? Like every professor needs to be able to access people. People need to be able to access all the faculty members. All the staff need to be able to call each other. People on the outside, all the stakeholders, all the grantees, all the community members need to be able to reach folks. Higher ed is comparatively super open. And that's kind of by necessity. We have to be that open if we're going to do our jobs and function effectively. But the more open we are, obviously, the more vulnerable we are. How to square that and offset that, I don't have an answer to. But it is kind of an innate characteristic of organizations that make them more or less vulnerable.
I will say on that note, because I feel like organizations generally don't have the resources to do these things. It seems like the tools that organizations are using, and what comes to mind is Microsoft 365, their built-in Defender, you're able to do phishing simulations and whatnot through that system. And so it seems like the technology is being used by these larger organizations, maybe taking on some of that responsibility to engage in, good spam filtering, procedures, making sure they have good rules set out for the different filters, and being able to monitor our contact in different ways, right? Whether it be a Teams meeting, whether it be our email, right? It's all kind of housed within Microsoft 365. So maybe, right, these third party or companies that are providing tools, resources to the organizations are building in more of that policy than the organizations are prepared to do.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, if you're that open, like higher ed, you would almost, if you wanted to make it secure, you would have to just operate under the assumption that people are going to be phished and socially engineered, then work backwards from that point.
Yeah. I mean, resistance to security. As much as I know how necessary that is, it is the bane of my early careership that collaborating with people outside of my organization requires all of this extra stuff because you can't share a OneDrive folder with someone outside of, your specific organization. And it makes sense to me. I know why we do it. I hate it.
But that goes to show, like, the university policy says you have to use these tools. Well, it's going to incentivize me as someone who's a collaborator with other people to go to Dropbox, right? Go use something else that's probably not as secure, that my university is not going to protect if I get screwed, right? But in order to better collaborate, I may take that chance.
Yeah, so I've made literally this argument, and this is universities across the country doing it, but K-State has revamped a lot of its security policies because we got hit with a major ransomware attack a couple of years ago, or a year ago. And one of the things they've done is they've really locked down our computers. Like we can't install anything or modify any system files unless IT comes over and does it for us, or we do like a remote connection session with them. And it's honestly, frankly, it's a big pain in the butt. I understand why we're doing that. It is going to offset the security risk. However, the warning I've kind of given some colleagues is what I anticipate happening is that this is going to be enough of an impediment for people doing their jobs that they're going to start finding ways around it.
Yes.
And that's a perfectly understandable behavior. It's not good for security, but if you lock down security too much, people are going to work around it because they still have to do their jobs.
Yeah, if you put a boulder in the river, it's going to flow outside of it eventually.
I love that metaphor.
Thank you.
Yeah, so one thing we're trying to ask everyone of this podcast is if you could take all of your research, all of your experiences, all of your knowledge, and get it down to one key piece of information that is beneficial for all parties, whether it be law enforcement, private companies, individuals. What is that one thing that from your research and your experience that you would want the average person to know and be aware of?
I guess I'll use this as an opportunity just to reiterate the point that we really have to remember that our policies are designed by people for people. And so the policy descriptions, the structures we build into it, the rules need to keep that in mind, that we're dealing with humans who have human brains, doing human behavior in human social interaction. And if we build our policies and our systems without that in mind, you're either going to make it more vulnerable or you're going to punish people for just being human. And I don't want to live in a society where we're increasingly, where humans are kind of increasingly being viewed as a nuisance for policy and technology. I don't want that to happen. So that's what I hope, is that we make sure that it's the other direction, that we're building all of this stuff to fit with humanity, not the other direction.
That's a really good point. And I realize we're kind of wrapping up, but I do have to ask, how is AI going to factor into all this? Do you see this as, well, we can take the human out of this to some degree, or?
And Tom, I think you know this. I think you know where I'm going to go with this. Is I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic about AI. One, because we're already seeing it used in cybercrime all over the place. It's already having an impact. And then a lot of the AI we have is overhyped, overpromised. It's not delivering that much social good. I can't think of that much social good being netted by these large language models at this point. But the resources they're consuming, the money that's going into them, the GPUs they're soaking up is massive. So I'm already skeptical on that front. And then I think that when we look at how AI is being implemented, it's by and large serving the interest of people in positions of power. It's serving corporations, it's serving the Sam Altmans of the world, it's serving the Mark Zuckerbergs. But what's my advantage? I basically get a fancier search engine. That's ultimately what it is. Or a plagiarism machine.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have a tough reckoning here in the next 5 to 10 years, where we may have to start entertaining things like the non-proliferation of AI type treaties. Like, we may have to have serious conversations about what these things can do and their impact on things like the labor market, because we're already seeing the disruption happen despite the assurances of some big tech folks. So I'm pessimistic. I'm kind of burying my head in the sand because the tidal wave's coming and I don't know what we can do about it without major institutional guardrails being put into place, which nobody seems to be wanting to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, like, it requires international cooperation. Like, good luck with that.
Yeah, especially now.
Yeah. I feel like my attempt at an optimistic takeaway, and I'm not saying you're being pessimistic, have echoed everything that's been rattling in my own mind, is let's all go outside and talk to each other and do fun things.
Yeah.
Keep the human in human behavior.
I remember a time when, like, go out and touch grass was kind of an insult. Now I'm like, I think we all might need to just go out and touch grass for a little while.
Literally.
Yes.
Truly.
So what are your thoughts on it, Tom?
On AI?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's tough. Because I agree with most of what you've said, and I can see it being viewed as this convenience that suddenly it can handle problems that were required to be dealt with by a person, that we can train to solve some of these problems. And I view it that it might become more of a crutch or kind of a carve out where, hey, we can just use this to solve this problem. And I think it will create some potential benefits, but I can also see a lot of problems that result from it that aren't addressed because it's the tool. The tool can handle this, as opposed to there's a human that needs to be engaged in this problem as well, not just a tool.
Yeah, I almost wish that we could just hit a big pause button until we all have a collective international conversation about what the policies and infrastructure should look like governing this before letting it. But obviously this is like the big tech mentality of move fast and break things. It's like, let's develop as fast as possible, and then let's make this normal for folks so that we don't have to worry about policy and guardrails. We can basically just do what we want.
Yeah. In the context of social engineering, I am more than slightly terrified at the idea of an AI model that's single goal is to create social engineering attempts, and it learns from how people spot them and when people cease interaction. And holy shit, we're just gonna end up with like a Decepticon.
Yeah.
We're gonna end up with an out of control AI model singularly designed to fool people.
I mean, we're already seeing that happen. Like, you know, there are like, we're seeing like chatbots, right, driven by GPT being used by Russian disinformation campaigns, right? That's already all over Twitter. We're seeing like romance fraudsters use chatbots to hook people and bait them, to automate the process of romance fraud. Like, and I can just hear folks going, well, we'll just develop AI models that are designed to counter that. And I'm like, oh, great. Now we're throwing a bunch of resources and energy at having AI talk to each other and keep each other busy. That's the world we're going to live in.
Yeah. Maybe we can let the robots fight and we'll all go outside and touch grass.
Yeah, there's a concept.
As it burns away the world's resources.
Oh my God. As we steer ourselves off into climate apocalypse. So
Happy Friday!
I know there's a video game / tabletop RPG series, and I think I mentioned this when I gave a talk at Michigan State called Cyberpunk, and they have this concept called the Black Wall, and in that is this idea that there is AI. The internet had a bunch of AIs that went rogue and were battling with each other and causing chaos and screwing with humanity, and so they figured out a way to throw a big wall over them, and said, okay, no more of those rogue AIs. We're rebuilding. They're all locked behind a wall. Hopefully they can't get out and screw with us anymore. And I'm like, well, that's clearly science fiction, but I'm watching like the development of AI and counter AI going, actually, that may not be that unrealistic here in the next 10, 15 years or sooner.
How do, in an attempt to end on a more positive note, if only for my own sake, how can we encourage, teach, strengthen people in their ability to recognize social engineering and the ways that it's impacting them?
And that's a good question. The way I would emphasize that people need to understand human behavior. They need to develop some level of emotional intelligence and compassion and empathy. Like, it's just not about like understanding, oh, somebody fell for something, we should not punish them. But it's also just, if you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you can understand, oh, I see how they fell for that. I see why it got them. Let's figure out a way to work backwards from there to see if we can make this better, if we can make them safer, and if we make our organization safer. But if this is just approached from this brutal kind of like rational technocratic mindset, it's not going to make us safer. We need to, this is humans helping humans, right?
All work is emotional work.
There it is.
Feeling very validated by that.
Glad I can help.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really, really great. I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. I feel like, yeah, we're all validated around the table here, and I think this gives us some good positive notes to end on, but some also difficult things to ruminate about.
For sure. I appreciate it. Thank you. I had a great time.
Yeah, glad you could make us. We are all going to go outside and touch grass. Be very demure, very mindful. We are glad that you were able to join us on another session of Crossing the Firewall. Don't forget, if you're listening to us on your favorite podcatcher, to subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like button, hit that notification bell. Make sure that you join us every single time the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is Crossing the Firewall.